Robert Plant, celebrated as the iconic lead singer of Led Zeppelin, is widely regarded as one of the most legendary figures in the history of rock music. On stage, he appeared almost otherworldly, a golden-haired figure exuding an aura of both power and mystery. His presence commanded attention, and his voice could captivate thousands of fans simultaneously, lifting them into a shared, almost spiritual experience. Yet beneath this seemingly transcendent persona lay a man of intense drive and unrelenting competitiveness. Plant was deeply aware of his own prominence in the rock world and viewed certain fellow musicians not merely as colleagues, but as potential threats to his status as the era's preeminent frontman. This awareness shaped both his interactions with peers and the careful cultivation of his public and private image. Plant's approach to music was famously philosophical, often framed in spiritual and mystical terms. He saw rock and roll as more than entertainment. He believed it was a calling, a channel through which deeper truths could be expressed. Yet while he embraced these higher ideals, he was equally uncompromising when it came to those he perceived as unworthy of sharing the spotlight. In a 1975 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, Plant articulated this view, declaring that rock and roll was a spiritual vocation and warning that not everyone who claimed to serve it truly understood its sacred dimensions. These convictions were not abstract notions. They became central to his worldview as he observed other musicians attempting to stake a claim in the same creative territories that he considered his own. Plant's rivalries, therefore, were never purely matters of ego. They were grounded in a profound belief that the essence of rock music carried spiritual responsibility. To him, being a rock star was not simply about fame or technical skill. It was about embodying and protecting the higher purpose of the art form. Number 1. Roger Daltrey, the aggressive rival. The first major figure Plant regarded as a professional rival was Roger Daltrey, the dynamic lead singer of The Who. Their rivalry was shaped not by personal animosity, but by a clash of vocal philosophies and stage approaches. Plant admired subtlety and the weaving of mystical and mythological imagery into his singing, but he found Daltrey's style raw, loud, and aggressively visceral, threatening. Daltrey's vocal power, in Plant's eyes, had the potential to overshadow his own intricate and spiritually infused performances, particularly among critics and fans who were attuned to volume as much as nuance. The competition between the two intensified during the early 1970s, a period when both were solidifying their positions as leading British rock vocalists. Phil Carson, a former executive at Atlantic Records, recounted that Plant would watch Daltrey perform with great scrutiny, often remarking to close associates that Daltrey screamed like he was fighting for his life, but lacked poetic depth. Plant felt that his own work, rich in references to Celtic mythology, ancient lore, and spiritual symbolism, represented a more elevated form of rock artistry, while Daltrey's powerful, working-class shouting was brute force, without the subtle magic Plant valued. The rivalry between Plant and Daltrey became particularly pronounced during festival circuits across Europe. In 1975, witnesses reported that Plant deliberately avoided Daltrey's after-show celebration, telling his bandmates that he refused to toast with someone who treated vocal cords merely as blunt instruments. While Daltrey appeared oblivious to Plant's critical feelings and later complimented Plant's vocal range in interviews, Plant viewed him as emblematic of rock's more primitive side, commanding, vigorous, and undeniably strong, yet spiritually shallow and lacking the mystical dimension that he believed distinguished true artists from mere performers. Number 2. Ian Anderson, the false mystic. Plant's second significant rivalry was with Ian Anderson, the distinctive frontman and flute player of Jethro Tull. Unlike his competition with Daltrey, Plant's objections to Anderson were less about technical skill and more about authenticity. Anderson was known for elaborate stage personas and theatricality, presenting music steeped in historical and folk traditions with a strong visual flair. Plant, by contrast, felt that his connection to ancient music and spiritual traditions was organic and heartfelt, an extension of personal insight rather than performance. The philosophical divide between the two began in 1971, as both explored medieval and folk-inspired musical themes. Terry Ellis, former manager at Chrysalis Records, recalled Plant expressing irritation with Anderson's approach, likening it to playing dress-up with history, while Plant himself claimed to channel the actual spirits of the eras he drew inspiration from. To Plant, the distinction between genuine spiritual engagement and theatrical mimicry was critical. While Anderson achieved success with academic precision and stagecraft, Plant viewed these methods as lacking the emotional core of the ancient music he revered. In a 1973 NME interview, Plant emphasized that spiritual authenticity could not be fabricated. It had to be inherently felt. Their rivalry escalated during a 1974 folk festival when Plant deliberately scheduled his performance to conflict with Anderson's set, signaling that he would not share the stage with someone treating musical ancestors as research subjects. Although Anderson appeared largely unaware of Plant's hostility and later praised his passion for tradition, Plant saw Anderson as embodying false mysticism, intellectual curiosity dressed as spiritual depth, more concerned with appearance than essence. Number 3. Getty Lee, the robotic voice. Plant's third notable rivalry was with Getty Lee, the frontman of the Canadian progressive rock band Rush. Lee was distinguished by his high-pitched, technically flawless voice, which exemplified precision and control. However, Plant viewed this style as emblematic of a troubling shift in rock music, away from emotional immediacy and raw human experience towards sterile technicality. As Rush rose to prominence in the mid-1970s, Plant reportedly reacted negatively whenever their music played on the radio. Danny Goldberg, a former executive at Swan Song Records, recounted Plant's frequent complaints, describing Lee's vocals as sounding like a computer trying to sing and lamenting the absence of the human soul. For Plant, who poured blues-rooted emotion into every performance, Lee's mechanical execution represented a dehumanization of rock music, a move toward precision at the expense of passion and connection. The generational divide between Plant and Lee became increasingly apparent as younger audiences gravitated toward Rush's cerebral, technically sophisticated style, often at the expense of Led Zeppelin's more organic, emotionally charged sound. In 1977, during a radio station visit, witnesses reported that Plant walked out when a Rush song played, later explaining to his manager that he could not endure witnessing what he called the death of rock motion in real time. Lee, seemingly unaware of Plant's contempt, later expressed admiration for Led Zeppelin's influence. Yet for Plant, Lee symbolized the mechanization of rock, music stripped of human feeling, replaced with flawless but soulless execution. Number 4. Freddy Mercury, the ultimate showman. Unlike Plant's disputes with Daltry, Anderson, or Lee, this rivalry was rooted in envy rather than stylistic disagreement. Plant admired Mercury personally. They would converse about preserving their voices as they aged, but professionally, Plant felt overshadowed by Mercury's unparalleled ability to control and command stadium audiences. Mercury's theatrical mastery made Plant's own mystical, spiritual stage presence seem almost restrained in comparison. During the late 1970s, as Queen's performances became celebrated as the epitome of rock spectacle, Plant reportedly attended concerts in disguise and left visibly upset. Roy Featherstone, former EMI executive, described Plant's frustration, noting that Mercury owned every person in that arena, reducing other performers to supporting roles. Plant recognized Mercury's extraordinary talent in crowd control, but questioned whether such dominance still constituted true rock music. At a 1979 European festival, Plant refused to watch Queen from the side of the stage, later admitting to bandmates that he could not bear to see Mercury command the audience with such ease. Mercury, in interviews, seemed aware of Plant's complex mixture of admiration and resentment, describing him as a beautiful singer with beautiful hair. Yet for Plant, Mercury represented the ultimate in stage perfection, natural, commanding, and so absolute that it highlighted the limitations of other artists, including himself. Number 5. David Bowie, the shapeshifter. Unlike previous rivalries, Plant's resentment was rooted not in envy of technique or stagecraft, but in Bowie's ability to repeatedly reinvent his artistic identity, while Plant remained confined within the well-defined persona of Led Zeppelin's mystical frontman. Bowie's ability to evolve musically and aesthetically created a contrast that Plant found both frustrating and inspiring. Tony DeFries, former RCA Records executive, recounted that Plant meticulously observed Bowie's transformations, often lamenting that Bowie could assume a new identity with each album, while he remained Robert Plant, locked into a singular, mystical image. Plant envied Bowie's artistic freedom and the critical acclaim he received for constantly exploring new musical territories, while he himself navigated fan expectations and the dynamics of Led Zeppelin. Plant articulated his frustration in a 1977 interview with Cream magazine, reflecting on how some artists were free to pursue every corner of their creativity, whereas others became prisoners of their own success. By 1983, during an industry gathering, Plant intentionally avoided Bowie's table, admitting that proximity to Bowie reminded him of the musical territories he would never have the opportunity to explore. The rivalry was less about personal animosity and more about artistic envy, a recognition of the freedom Bowie enjoyed that Plant himself coveted. Number 6. Mick Jagger, the ultimate enemy. Finally, Plant's most intense and personal rivalry was with Mick Jagger, the iconic frontman of the Rolling Stones. This feud was rooted in Plant's perception that Jagger trivialized the blues, an art form Plant revered for its spiritual depth. Beginning in the late 1960s, Plant grew increasingly frustrated with Jagger's stage persona, viewing his performance style as a pantomime that mocked the very essence of the music Plant cherished. According to Richard Cole, a longtime Led Zeppelin roadie, Plant frequently criticized Jagger, asserting that he wore the music as a costume rather than truly feeling it. The rivalry escalated by 1973 when Plant confronted Jagger at an industry event, denouncing him for making a mockery of sacred musical traditions. Music journalist Nick Kent later quoted Plant, who argued that Jagger represented all that was wrong with rock stardom: style without substance, movement without meaning, and sexuality without soul. Jagger, maintaining his characteristic diplomacy, never publicly responded to Plant's criticisms. For Plant, however, Jagger embodied the ultimate artistic betrayal. By commercializing and trivializing the spiritual foundations of the blues, Jagger had crossed a line that went beyond professional rivalry. It was a challenge to the integrity of the musical tradition that Plant considered his life's calling. Together, these rivalries provide a window into the complex personality of Robert Plant. Despite his image as a mystical, almost otherworldly rock god, he displayed very human tendencies toward jealousy, competitiveness, and possessiveness. His feuds with Daltry centered on vocal style and expressive nuance, while his disputes with Anderson examined authenticity versus theatricality. Conflicts with Lee highlighted emotion versus technical precision, and envy of Mercury was rooted in stage presence and audience command. Frustration with Bowie reflected creative limitation and the desire for artistic freedom, whereas his hatred for Jagger stemmed from the commercialization of sacred musical traditions. Collectively, these rivalries reveal an artist deeply committed to his craft, fiercely protective of rock music's spiritual and emotional essence, and unwilling to compromise on his vision. They illustrate that even the most revered figures in music are not immune to jealousy, insecurity, and the pressures of maintaining both artistic integrity and legendary status. In the end, Robert Plant's rivalries were as much a reflection of his personal values and ideals as they were of professional competition. Each feud illuminates a different aspect of his character: his insistence on spiritual authenticity, his respect for emotional depth, his admiration for technical brilliance tempered by concern for soulfulness, and his understanding of the delicate balance between artistry and showmanship. Plant's legacy, therefore, is not only one of unparalleled musical achievement, but also a portrait of a man profoundly invested in the moral and emotional dimensions of rock and roll, determined to defend them even when it placed him at odds with some of the greatest talents of his generation.